Good evening, TheoTRADE. This is Corey Rosenblum, and you're watching the Theo Nightly Video for the 22nd of August here in 2023. We had a flat market today with a range session taking us back to where we started, although stocks did end lower in today's session. Weakest, that was the Dow, down about 0.5%. The Nasdaq was flat. The S&P was down a little bit, as was the Russell. And outside of that, bonds, or I should say crude oil, down about 0.5%. It was, speaking of bonds, the leader in today's session, bonds, TLT, up 0.77%, so almost a whole percent in the bond market, which is coming up off those lows. Now, in this week ahead, we're seeing retail sales, not retail sales in terms of the economic report, but retail stocks reporting earnings. And we'll start right here with Lowe's. Lowe's reported earnings just in terms of tonight's video. We're going to look at the headline numbers, not so much down into the economic reports. And always remember that if we cover stocks in the evening game plans, you can look at the Analyze tab, and the Analyze tab for any of these stocks would show you the analyst expectations and the earnings, of course. The fundamental data would be right beneath that. That'll be true for any stock you see. And if you want to dig a little bit into the earnings, this is the fundamentals tab. Right here would be the earnings tab for any stock you want to look at, including Lowe's. Lowe's was one of the leading stocks in today's session. Let's start here. Which stock gained the most in today's session? It was Lowe's. Seeing it on an intraday basis, it was a trend day up. It was bullish from the open, bullish from the earnings. And that's what we have for that particular retail name. Was that the case in other stocks? No. Now, Macy's does not show up in the S&P 100, but because we see that right there, it does show up in the S&P 500. Macy's had earnings in today's session. It went the exact opposite way. Now, what's the difference in Macy's and Lowe's? Looking at fundamentals, back to the fundamental tab, a little weaker on the fundamentals, but its stock was in and continues a downtrend for the most part of 2023. So for me and my scans, Macy's, a retail name, a big retail name, is a stock that shows retail or shows a strong or weak stock getting weaker. And that stock has made, as we'll see just in a few moments here, it's actually the smallest market cap in the list. But that stock, Macy's, on earnings has pushed to a new 52-week low to continue the downtrend, and that's off 14% in today's trading session. We'll come back to these other names just in a moment. But Macy's down, Macy's down, and the other stock up is Lowe's. We'll see Foot Locker coming up. So outside of that, those were the two stocks that had major earnings. We'll take a look at some of the others. We had Lowe's, Baidu's, Dick's Sporting Goods, Medtronic, and others that we had earnings for today's session. Tomorrow, as we plan the week ahead, you can see it, I see it, it's NVIDIA. There's Foot Locker, there's Peloton. So other stocks did have their earnings. Dick's Sporting Goods, Medtronic, again Macy's, and Lowe's are the two that I want to focus on because they went in the opposite direction in retail. And we are closely watching stocks in the retail sector. Some of them are seeing strength, getting stronger, but a lot of those retail names and retail stocks, things you are probably familiar with, are not showing the same strength. Macy's is one of those on the downside. And then we have NVIDIA, Foot Locker, and Peloton on Wednesday's session. We'll talk about it in future weekly or daily updates. But Jackson Hole, that's your Federal Reserve, that is Chair Powell, will make his statements about the economy and how they see the recession, the expansion, the jobs situation, increasing, declining, GDP, and all the things they look at, and whether or not this is as high as it gets for the Fed funds rate. We'll see that come out in Thursday and Friday. But before we get there, again, earnings are in focus, and just seeing some of those names in the session. So which stocks had earnings in today's session? If you want to take a little broader look, it was Macy's, Medtronic, Lowe's. They reported pre-market And in tomorrow's session, we'll have Bath and Body Works, Analog Devices, and Advanced Auto Parts. Those probably, again, some of those are retail names. There's Bath and Body Works and Advanced Auto Parts retail. They're going to be outshadowed, I think, at least by NVIDIA. But also NetApp, Autodesk, and day after that is Dollar Tree. So I think this week has a lot to say about the health of the retail sector and some of the big retail names in the S&P. And these will be reporting earnings coming up. So we'll focus on those plays, but it is down to NVIDIA. And this one is one I had to check a couple times. I run this scan of stocks making 52-week highs, and it's just in the S&P 500. NVIDIA made a new 52-week high. I was confused about that because the stock had sold off all day, but when I ran the scan at the end of the session, it popped up, and sure enough, it met the criterion to pop to a new 52-week high. And that may be a little shocking about this stock and its volatility. It will have earnings coming up on the next trading session, and as of right now, if you're going to play a butterfly or play some type of position in NVIDIA, the risk is high, the volatility is high. It has currently a $51 expected move with about 154 or 55% implied volatility. That's what you would look at for any of these stocks that you want to play a butterfly or play a front of the earnings. My preference is to trade outside or after earnings, especially fades against expected moves on an intraday basis. Or, like Home Depot, a stock that traded up to the top of the range, had its earnings last week and traded down. That's a good place to go into a short or a put position, which is into a daily resistance target of a sideways trading range stock. Home Depot fit that bill and currently is seeing the market sell off for that position. But for NVIDIA shares, just to be objective and remember the last one of the last times we had earnings, and I was bullish of NVIDIA, but not that bullish. This is the expected move. I kept that on the chart just to show how powerful the earnings can be and how we must have our positions controlled or the risk controlled mainly through the use of options as opposed to shares or something along those lines. Butterflies are a very good way to play into expected move logic, but when a market goes higher than expected, that butterfly will expire worthless in the grand scheme of things. So there was the expected move, and there was, I think it was a quadrupling, 4 times the expected move on the earnings. The current expected move going into tomorrow's session of NVIDIA is $51. And if we play that, we'll see how this plays here. What upside target might that be? We'll just clear this out. I was doing work on this earlier in the targets. So from the close, $51 up puts it roughly 508 per share, and down puts it around 405 per share. So that would be the play, or would be the numbers to watch carefully in NVIDIA after its earnings. But again, not to be outshadowed by that stock. Foot Locker, Peloton, and other stocks, including Ulta, a retail name, Intuit, Dollar Tree, Marvel Technologies. And those are things we'll be watching again on the retail side of the trade. All sectors except for the Y, which is your consumer discretionary, that's your retail. Again, those are in focus. And utilities, were red today. Those are the only two that were positive, trading up in today's session and not by much. Again, it was a down day in the market, crude down, but the focus is remaining on the bond market, which made new 52-week lows. See that in the TLT. There's your futures contract ZN 10-year, and there's your ZB, the 30-year bond. Right on the flip side of those, just taking us a little perspective outside of earnings, which are in focus, is the 10-year Treasury yield. And that just about pushed to the 4.4%, closed above 4.3. Again, looking at this TNX chart, if it says 43, that's actually 4.3%. This is the way the TNX prints its yield. So that is where we are on this continued upswing or uptrend on the bond yield and downtrend in the bond market. And we have the same thing with the Federal Reserve combating inflation by raising the interest rates. Overnight funds, Fed funds rate, but that does trickle down the yield curve. And we see that 10-year all-important Treasury yield at 52-week highs, back to where it was and just a little bit above it in today's session. We will know more at the end of the week, which again is the Jackson Hole, which is the Federal Reserve or Chair Powell's summit taking place there. So that's the week ahead. Again, NVIDIA, retail stocks, and the Fed, and more. Be careful, be safe. This is Corey Rosenblum with tonight's Theo video update for August 22nd, 2023.